Hey guys, tonight we travel back to the edge of a desert so wide, so dry, and so gold-tinted it feels more like a fever dream than a landscape. You're not quite sure where you are, somewhere near the old empire of Mali, maybe just past the last river tree. But the heat has already soaked into your sandals, and every breath feels like inhaling sun-baked dust. The dunes in the distance shimmer with quiet menace. Your only companions? Camels. So many camels. You probably won't survive this. Not because of any war or wild beast, but because if you had to hike 10 hours a day in loose sand, wrapped in layers of cotton, chewing nothing but dried meat and date paste, well, you'd probably start hallucinating by lunchtime. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments. Where are you listening from, and what time is it for you? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step into a different rhythm here. Not the digital pulse of clocks and cars, but the plodding, deliberate crunch of camel feet sinking into the sand. The man walking ahead of you has wrapped his head in a blue cloth, only his eyes showing, eyes that squint against the horizon like they've seen this route 100 times before. And maybe they have. This is the Western Sahara after all, the trade highway of medieval West Africa, where goods and stories drifted across the desert with equal weight. Somewhere past that ridge lies the land of Mali, where the great river bends wide and slow, where palm trees lean in soft angles over fishing villages, and where one man, still unnamed in your mind, will someday reshape the image of African power. But not yet. First there's dust, then heat, then gold. Long before Mansa Musa rose to prominence, Mali was already humming, not with machines, but with traders, salt from the desert, gold from the southern mines, ivory, slaves, cola nuts, and, yes, books when they could be found. Trade wasn't a side hustle here. It was the bloodstream, and where goods flowed, so did influence. You stopped to rest beneath a thorny tree with roots curled like old fingers. A local griot sits nearby, his voice hoarse but steady, telling a story passed from tongue to tongue for generations. In his tale, the land was once ruled by a lion king named Sundiata, who could summon warriors with a look and bend rivers with his wisdom. Is that exactly how it happened? Probably not, but that's the magic of oral history. It's not just about facts, it's about memory. And memory is what Mansa Musa would eventually master. But we're not there yet. Right now, the throne is occupied by a ruler named Abu Bakr II, at least according to the few scraps of historical record we have. And here's where it gets weird. Some say Abu Bakr II got curious about the edge of the Atlantic. Legend claims he packed up a fleet, yes, a whole fleet, and set out to see if there was more world beyond the sea. He never returned. No one knows if he reached Brazil or just drifted into history's blind spot. But when he vanished, his deputy, a man named Musa, was appointed to take his place. Historians still argue whether Musa seized the moment or whether it was handed to him on a salty, sun-warped platter. Either way, by the early 1300s, Mansa Musa was king. But right now, he's still just a name. Maybe a tall man with a soft voice. Maybe already dreaming of something bigger than dust trails and barter markets. Maybe watching this very caravan, counting the camels, planning a journey of his own. You fall asleep under the night sky, stars sharp enough to pierce through your eyelids. Someone nearby is muttering in Songhai, another in Arabic. A breeze drifts over your feet, cooler than expected. and the sand smells faintly of earth and old rain. You roll over and listen to the distant sound of a camel shifting its weight. No music, no screens, just the endless quiet of a land where silence was never emptiness. It was authority. This is the beginning, not of a legend, but of a man who didn't shout, who didn't wage wars for sport, who didn't carve his name into mountains. He simply walked, gave, built, and left behind a glow that even desert sand couldn't quite bury. You wake before the sun, not because an alarm went off, there are no clocks here, but because the desert has its own way of nudging people out of sleep. The sky is still violet, bruised with the last traces of night. Someone nearby is already boiling water over a small flame, and you can smell something herbal. Possibly dried mint, possibly just yesterday's tea leaves reused out of habit. The sand is cooler underfoot, briefly soft and forgiving, before it turns back into a frying pan by mid-morning. As you stretch and shake the stiffness from your limbs, you wonder, what kind of place gave birth to a king like Mansa Musa? To understand that, you'll need to leave the camel trains for a moment and head to the heart of an empire. The Mali Empire didn't start with Musa. It began long before him, sometime in the 13th century, in a world where kingdoms rose along rivers, not coastlines. Mali grew from the remnants of Ghana, not the modern country, but the ancient empire by the same name, whose control over West African trade routes made it wealthy long before Europe had working plumbing. When Ghana weakened under outside pressure and internal squabbles, a new force emerged in the fertile plains around the Niger River. That force was Mali. If you could hover above it like a desert falcon, you'd see a world in motion. Narrow canoes drifting past clusters of homes built from sun-baked mud, markets ringing with quiet bartering, cattle herders moving slow, deliberate herds across grassy plateaus. In cities like Niani, the capital, according to many sources, you'd find something even more impressive: administration, tax collectors, scribes, grain storage. Mali wasn't just vast, it was organized, and yet so much of it was oral. That's the thing. Mali kept few written records of its own. Most of what we know about this era comes from outside eyes: Arab travelers, Moroccan chroniclers, and centuries later historians squinting at fragments. Historians still debate whether Niani truly was the capital or just the city that got the most attention from scribes. Some argue it moved from time to time, depending on the ruler's mood or military needs. Others insist it was always Niani, because Musa lived there. The truth? Probably a mix of both. But even with the gaps, we know this much: Mali thrived because it balanced strength with subtlety. Sundiata Keita, the legendary founder of Mali, is often remembered as a warrior king. But the real key to his empire's rise was diplomacy. He united diverse tribes not by crushing them, but by giving them space to breathe within a larger structure. His successors followed that model. Expansion, yes, but also integration. You could be Fulani, Mandinka, Songhai. It didn't matter. As long as the taxes came in and the trade kept flowing, the empire welcomed your loyalty. It was in this world of quiet governance and loud markets that Musa came of age. He likely grew up hearing stories of Sundiata's rise, stories performed with rhythm and music by griots at court. He would have seen trade caravans arrive from the north, loaded with salt and fine cloth, and leave again heavy with gold and ivory. He would have understood early on that power here didn't always come from the blade, but from the balance sheet. You duck under a clay archway and enter the imagined city of Niani. The air is cooler here, shaded by thick walls and woven mats hanging from doorways. You pass a blacksmith, rhythmically tapping iron into a tool, A market woman calls out prices for millet, her voice sharp and sure. The scent of shea butter drifts from a nearby courtyard where women are pounding nuts into paste. Everything hums, not loudly, but steadily. And then there's the palace. Don't picture marble, picture earth, thick, sturdy walls built from packed mud, smoothed with clay and painted with faint geometric patterns. Inside, it's dim and cool. Musa, not yet Mansa, may have walked these same hallways. He may have sat beside senior advisors, learning how to read tribute reports, resolve border squabbles, and decide whether to send grain or soldiers to a troubled region. There are no portraits of him from this time, no statues, no official court paintings, just silence. But silence in Mali doesn't mean absence. It means waiting, listening, preparing. You stop beneath a tall tree in the palace courtyard. A servant passes, balancing a platter of roasted yam and honeyed dates. A young boy chases a goat past your sandals. Two older men sit cross-legged in discussion, not loud, but deliberate. This was a place of policy, not performance, and still, no gold in sight. That's the other surprise. The Mali Empire was rich, yes, but the people didn't flaunt it the way Europe might. Gold was valued, certainly, but it wasn't woven into every fabric or hung from every ear. It was stored, guarded, mined in silence and moved in shadows. The wealth of Mali was in its order, its water, its grain, its trust in systems that didn't need to scream to function. And somewhere in that quiet center of power, Musa began to plan. He didn't come from chaos. He came from structure, and from that base, he would build a reputation that would echo, quietly but permanently, across continents. But for now, the streets are calm. The empire hums, and somewhere, a young man studies a map not drawn yet. You're standing just outside the palace courtyard, brushing dust off your robe, when a hush moves through the crowd like a breeze before a storm. Not fear, not excitement, just attention. Heads turn. Conversations pause. You don't hear a trumpet. You don't see a guard rushing forward. But you feel it. Something has changed. Some say it was the most uneventful rise to power in imperial history. Others say it was a silent revolution, wrapped in silk and protocol. Either way, Mansa Musa is now king, and the empire doesn't skip a beat. There's no lavish coronation described in the records, no inscriptions announcing the new ruler with drums or declarations, just a line in a centuries-later manuscript, written by a Moroccan historian named Al-Umari, noting that Musa became king after the previous ruler, Abu Bakr II, disappeared into the Atlantic on a voyage of obsession. According to the tale, Abu Bakr launched hundreds of ships westward to discover what lay beyond the sea. And when none of them returned, except one, reportedly terrified by endless ocean, the king decided to lead the second expedition himself. He never came back. So Musa, possibly a high-ranking advisor or deputy at the time, was left with the crown. Historians still argue whether this version of events was true, invented, or politely edited for diplomatic reasons. Some suspect the handover was not entirely peaceful. Others argue that Mali's royal line often appointed successors from a broader pool of nobles, not strictly from father to son. Whatever the case, Musa emerged as Mansa, king of kings, and the empire shifted around him with a kind of quiet gravity. You walk the same hallways he would have walked, rooms cool with stone, walls pressed smooth with clay. No gilded thrones, no ivory lions, just low benches, carved stools, rolled scrolls, and patient messengers waiting their turn. That was Mali's power, quiet structure, and Musa fit into it as if he'd always been there. Still, something about him was different. He didn't just want to maintain Mali, He wanted to show the world what it was, not in speeches, not in conquest, but in something far older, a pilgrimage. In Islam, it's called the Hajj, one of the 5 pillars of the faith. Every able-bodied Muslim with means is expected to travel to Mecca at least once in their life. It's a spiritual journey, but also a social one, a network, a declaration of presence. And for Musa, ruler of one of the wealthiest, least understood empires on the planet, it was the perfect vehicle for a quiet kind of influence. So, preparations began. But before the camels, before the roads, before the gold bars wrapped in cloth and the orchestras of courtiers, there was a meeting. Probably right here, in this shaded council chamber you now imagine, with its reed mats and low-hanging lamps. Musa, now Mansa, would have sat cross-legged, surrounded by advisors, scribes, and military leaders. Not to seek permission, but to plan precision. A journey like this wasn't just about faith, it was logistics. Musa intended to bring thousands with him, not soldiers, not crusaders, but servants, scholars, cooks, architects, translators, guides, and, of course, camel handlers. Every step from Mali to Mecca had to be charted in advance, water sources identified, safe resting places secured, trade protocols arranged for every border crossed. You listen as one advisor mutters about how much grain is needed to feed the caravan. Another calculates how much gold must be carried and how to divide it for gifts, trade, and donations. A map is unrolled, its edges curling back from habit, and fingers trace the long, winding path, from Niani to Walata, across the Sahara to Cairo, then down through the Red Sea to Mecca. This was no small trip. It would take over a year, possibly 2, and yet Musa commits without hesitation. You step into a storeroom lit by a single oil lamp. Inside, sacks of dried food are piled like bricks, rolled carpets, fine cotton tunics, bundled gifts for rulers and scholars along the way. And at the very back, guarded not with swords but with silence, are tightly wrapped packages of gold dust, gold ingots, and gold-leafed manuscripts meant for donation. Here's your quirky tidbit. Musa didn't just pack gold, he packed architects. He intended not just to travel, but to build. Outside, the city begins to buzz. Skilled workers are summoned to prepare wagons and camel saddles. Musicians tune their instruments. Servants learn travel etiquette. Even the palace goats seem nervous. This is not a royal hunt or a seasonal relocation. This is something no ruler from Mali had ever attempted at this scale. And here's the softest truth of all. Musa wasn't doing it for fame. He wanted to pray, to fulfill his faith, and perhaps quietly, to elevate his empire in the minds of others, not through force, but presence. Imagine you're standing at the edge of Niani as dawn breaks. A low drum sounds. The first camels step forward. Their shadows stretch long across the ground. The great Hajj of Mansa Musa has begun. He doesn't wave. He doesn't speak. He just rides, eyes forward, posture relaxed, bearing the weight of gold, faith, and empire. You blink against the heat, and the caravan is already a ribbon on the horizon. Camels sway side to side like clockwork pendulums. Each step kicks up a puff of powdered sand that floats, then disappears. There's no shouting, no urgency, just the long, slow procession of a pilgrimage that moves to its own rhythm, measured not in hours, but in dunes. Mansa Musa's Hajj wasn't a solo trip. It was an epic in motion. Sources differ, of course. They always do. But many agree the caravan included 60,000 people. That's not a typo. 60,000. Alongside them, 100 camels, each carrying hundreds of pounds of gold. There were slaves, servants, musicians, scholars, generals, cooks, architects, and translators. There were goats for milk, horses for honor, elephants, yes, actual elephants, for visual impact. Because if you're going to walk across a continent, you might as well bring a parade. Historians still debate whether that number is exaggerated. Some say it might have been closer to 20,000. Others argue even that would be unprecedented. But the point wasn't the math, it was the message. Musa was coming, not to conquer, not to brag, but to witness and to be witnessed. You walk beside one of the outer flanks. The heat radiates not just from the sun above, but from the people themselves. The steady rustle of footsteps, the jingle of camel harnesses, and the soft murmur of recited prayers blend into a kind of living lullaby. Someone passes you a date wrapped in cloth. Another offers water from a skin bag that smells faintly of goats. And then you see it. Gold. Not piles of it, not coins clinking in chests, but gold dust packed into fine leather pouches, bars wrapped in cloth, sheets folded carefully between religious texts. It isn't flaunted, but it's everywhere. You can't walk 5 feet without seeing someone adjusting the weight of a saddlebag with something suspiciously shiny inside. And here's the tricky bit. Transporting gold like that wasn't just heavy, it was dangerous. Not in terms of robbery, Musa had enough guards to discourage that, but in terms of what gold could do when used in the wrong way, in the wrong place, with the wrong intention. He would learn that soon enough. But for now, the road ahead is long. The first major destination, Walata, a town at the edge of the Sahara. There, the caravan would rest, resupply, and prepare for the most brutal leg of the journey, the crossing of the desert itself. Imagine it, sand for days, no trees, no villages, just heat, wind, and the need for perfect timing. Miss a water source, and you risk dehydration. Arrive too late in the season, and temperatures could boil a camel from the inside out. That's not a joke. Camels may be resilient, but even they have limits. At night, fires flicker along the dunes like distant stars. People huddle in clusters, sharing food, prayers, and whispered gossip. You overhear one man boasting that he's seen the Nile. Another claims he's met merchants from China. Someone's playing a soft melody on a wooden flute. No one seems tired of the walking. They're walking with purpose. Because at the center of it all, sometimes visible, sometimes not, is Mansa Musa. He doesn't ride a golden litter. He doesn't wear a crown. Most of the time, you'd mistake him for another dignified man in clean robes, speaking little, listening much. And yet, when he passes, the mood changes. A little quieter, a little more focused. His leadership isn't loud. It doesn't need to be. Everyone here knows who he is and what he represents. Here's a quirky little note. Some accounts claim that even the slaves in the caravan wore gold and fine fabrics. That's how abundant the wealth was. Others wore silk, imported all the way from Egypt or even Persia. The fabrics shimmered in the sun, and traders in the towns they passed through would stop what they were doing just to watch the procession go by. Eventually, after weeks of trekking, the landscape begins to change. The dunes grow smaller. The breeze carries hints of river reeds and unfamiliar spices. You see minarets in the distance, low against the horizon, then growing taller as the caravan nears. They've reached Cairo. It's not the end of the journey, but it's the beginning of the world noticing. When Mansa Musa enters the city, he doesn't send trumpets ahead. He doesn't demand attention. But his presence is like a pebble dropped in still water. The ripples begin at once. People stare. They whisper. Who is this man from the south, who dresses modestly, yet travels with 60,000? Who gives away gold like water? Who prays at every mosque, stays at no palace, and tips every clerk like he's rewarding a scribe from heaven? The city bends around him, and within days, whether he intended it or not, he's about to change the course of Cairo's economy. You blink twice as you step through the shaded archways of Cairo, because it feels like the air just shifted from dry to decadent. The sand beneath your feet gives way to polished stone, and the scent of the desert is replaced by something else entirely. Roasted lamb, dates soaked in honey, and, somehow, cinnamon. You're in the heart of one of the great cities of the Islamic world, and you can feel it with every breath. And right behind you, Mansa Musa. He enters quietly. No dramatic procession, no declarations. Just a tall, calm figure surrounded by a few hundred companions, with the rest of the caravan trailing in a carefully organized sprawl outside the city walls. You'd expect trumpets, but instead, there's murmuring. Cairo isn't used to being impressed, not by visitors, not by traders, not by kings, but Musa's not here to impress, he's here to pray. First, he visits the mosque of Amr ibn al-As, the oldest mosque in Egypt, built just a few years after the Prophet Muhammad's passing. It's a wide, quiet place with palm trunk columns and cool air whispering through its open courtyard. Musa removes his sandals, washes his hands, feet, and face, and steps into the prayer space. He doesn't speak to the crowd gathering outside. He doesn't even glance around. He bows, he recites, he thanks. But Cairo watches. Word spreads like ink in water. There's a king in the city who gives away gold, literally gives it away, to merchants, to poor families, to mosque builders, to scholars, to every man whose sandals seem too thin or whose sleeves are worn through. No bargaining, no request for favors, just calm, open-handed generosity. And here's the problem. Cairo's economy wasn't ready. Historians still debate the full impact, but one thing is clear. Musa flooded the market. So much gold changed hands in such a short period that it devalued the currency. Prices dropped. Traders complained. For over a decade, Egypt's dinar wobbled like a camel on loose gravel. Some scholars even argue it's the only case in recorded history where one man's charitable spending caused national inflation. Let that sink in. He didn't invade. He didn't sabotage. He just tipped too well. Of course, it wasn't out of arrogance. Musa, by all accounts, was deeply devout. His giving wasn't performative, it was foundational. Islam encouraged charity, and he followed that to the letter. But charity at home looks different than charity abroad. And in a city where the economy ran on precise exchange rates and cautious trade? His kindness broke the math. Here's your quirky detail. Years later, when European bankers and mapmakers heard rumors of this gold tsunami, they thought it had to be fiction. A black king from Africa with so much gold he caused chaos in Cairo? Nonsense. And yet, the ripples were real. Back in Cairo, Musa also meets with dignitaries, carefully, respectfully. He's not just a tourist, he's a sovereign, and every ruler in the region wants a word with the king who can bankroll a caravan like this. He agrees to audiences, but never boasts. He speaks little, listens much, and always ends with a gift. You follow him to a meeting with the Mamluk Sultan's deputy. The two sit on embroidered cushions, a thin tray of dates and sweet tea between them. They exchange greetings. Musa offers gold. The deputy blinks, unsure whether to accept. But he does. Who wouldn't? And still, Musa doesn't linger. He spends a few weeks in Cairo, long enough for his companions to rest, long enough for more gold to trickle into the markets, long enough for gossip to turn into legend, and then he moves on. But Cairo doesn't forget. The merchants will talk of him for years. The imams will remember the king who prayed beside them, silent and generous. And the gold, it'll remain in circulation, reshaping trade deals, disrupting prices, and slowly teaching everyone that Mali is not a footnote, it's a force. You walk the streets one last time. The echoes of the caravan have faded, but their impact lingers. A jeweler adjusts his pricing board for the third time today. A tea vendor shakes his head and mutters something about foreign kings and their strange generosity. You smile. Because what they don't know, what you do, is that this was only halfway. The Hajj is still ahead. Mecca waits, the Red Sea waits, and when Musa finally returns home, he won't come back empty-handed. You leave Cairo with the caravan before the sun rises, when the streets are still damp with dew and only the earliest vendors are stirring. The city behind you is quieter now, less gold-crazed, more thoughtful. Ahead lies the eastern desert, the Red Sea, and beyond that, the Holy City. But Musa doesn't seem rushed. As the caravan winds its way out of Egypt, the rhythm returns, steady steps, camels swaying, prayers recited under breath. The road to Mecca isn't just a physical journey. It's spiritual, social, and logistical. And every mile brings Musa deeper into the global web of the Islamic world. Historians often focus on the gold he gave away, but less attention is paid to what he gathered. This was his education. Every city was a classroom, every imam a mentor, every architect and merchant a new lens through which he could view his empire back home. And in those quiet hours between prayer and dusk, Musa was learning. You sit beside him one evening, beneath a sky laced with stars so clear they look arranged by hand. The fire crackles low. One of his advisors gently reads aloud a verse from the Quran, his voice slow and deep. Musa listens, not just with his ears, but with the kind of stillness that draws everyone else into silence too. He's not a king on tour. He's a pilgrim in focus. By the time the caravan reaches the Red Sea port of Adhab, the mood has shifted. The desert dust gives way to salty air. Gulls cry overhead. Ships rock softly in the harbor, and the smell of brine mixes with spice, clove, cinnamon, maybe even dried orange. Boats are loaded, camels are rested, and the pilgrims, Musa included, prepare for the final stretch by sea. It's a short crossing, but not an easy one. The Red Sea is temperamental, but eventually the sails fill with wind, and the shores of the Arabian Peninsula appear like a promise on the horizon. And then, Mecca. The city isn't grand in size. It's not filled with palaces or walled fortresses, but it vibrates with something different: reverence. Pilgrims from every corner of the Islamic world walk its streets, wrapped in the same simple garments, reciting the same verses, facing the same Kaaba. And here, Musa sheds the last visible signs of power. He wears the plain white cloth of ihram, no gold, no silks, just two unstitched pieces of fabric, like every other man performing Hajj. You follow him into the Grand Mosque. The air is cool and thick with prayer. Thousands of voices rise and fall in perfect rhythm. The marble beneath your feet is smooth and worn. And in the center, black, cubic, ancient, stands the Kaaba. Musa approaches, not first, not last. His steps are slow. His eyes are lowered. He circles with the others, completes the rites, and prays. There's no record of what he said. No speeches, no proclamations, just the quiet certainty that his journey, at least this part of it, was fulfilled. But here's where it gets interesting. Musa doesn't stop. He stays in Mecca for some time, longer than most. He meets scholars, commissions copies of important texts, observes architectural styles, listens to debates, and he recruits. One of the most notable figures he brings back with him? A man named Abu Ishaq al-Sahili, a poet, scholar, and architect from Andalusia, who would go on to help reshape Mali's cities with new design philosophies. Some say he built Timbuktu's legendary mosque. Others argue he was more of a consultant than a builder. Historians still debate the details, but his influence is undeniable. Musa wasn't just absorbing, he was curating. Books, brains, bricks. You sit with him one afternoon under the arches of a school near Mecca, listening as scholars discuss astronomy and law in equal measure. Musa says little, but when he nods, you can see it's not out of politeness. It's with purpose. He's collecting the world, carefully, thoughtfully, and not for himself, for Mali. Because this journey isn't about returning richer, it's about returning wiser. He wants libraries, schools, mosques not just as places of prayer, but centers of thought. And as the camels are reloaded, the scrolls wrapped, and the sea winds catch the sails once more, he's already planning what comes next. The Hajj may be ending, but the building hasn't even begun. You step back onto African soil with sand in your shoes, salt in your hair, and a mind brimming with unfamiliar ideas. The Red Sea lies behind you, and the journey home begins, not in silence, but in soft conversation. Musa is not the same man who left, and the empire that awaits him isn't expecting what he now carries. But first, there's the return trip, and it moves slower. Part of that is the natural drag of exhaustion. Thousands of people, dozens of animals, countless items packed, repacked, misplaced, and replaced again. But there's something else too, the weight of intention. The gold is lighter now. The caravan has given much away. But in its place, Musa is bringing something harder to pack, knowledge. In Cairo, on the way back, he pauses again. It's unclear how long he stays, but this second visit is quieter, more deliberate. There's less gifting, less fanfare. This time, it's about conversations. Musa meets again with scholars, possibly commissioning more texts or arranging for intellectual exchanges. One of the more memorable figures he spends time with is the architect and polymath al-Sahili. The two speak of cities, symmetry, faith, and function. Some say al-Sahili joined the caravan right then. Others argue Musa invited him to Mali later by letter. But everyone agrees. Something clicked. Mali would not just be a place of trade. It would become a place of thought. The return across the Sahara is brutal. Wind patterns have shifted. The sun feels angrier. Wells have dried unexpectedly, and one camel goes mad from heat. You shield your face with a damp cloth and squint at the endless dunes. Yet the caravan presses forward, now experienced, now seasoned. Here's your quirky moment. To keep the morale steady, some in the caravan begin composing songs about sand. Yes, actual songs. One verse praises the miracle of shade beneath a camel's belly. Another compares the taste of travel rations to chewing parchment from a scholar's journal. The rhythm, however dry, keeps the feet moving. As the caravan approaches Walata again, the mood shifts. The people of Mali have heard stories, traders have rushed ahead, gossip has galloped faster than camels. There are tales of a king who gave away gold like rain, a king who stood in Mecca as humbly as a farmer, a king who returned not with more wealth, but with wisdom. You walk beside Musa as the outer fields of the empire come into view. Farmers pause mid-harvest. Children stare wide-eyed. A goat scampers away from the sound of drums, struck gently to announce the return. But this isn't a parade. Musa rides in calmly, almost unnoticed in the blur of returning faces and loaded camels. He doesn't wave, he doesn't speak, but everything is different. The empire now sees itself through new eyes, and Musa has already made his next decision. Building, he doesn't wait. Within weeks of returning to Niani, Musa begins laying plans, not for another journey, but for a transformation. Mali is vast, rich, respected, but now it will also be learned. He sends word across the empire, summoning architects, scribes, scholars, and builders. He commissions mosques in cities barely mapped. He asks questions few rulers dared. Where is our great library? Why don't we have more teachers? What if a merchant's son wanted to study astronomy? You find yourself in a newly shaded courtyard, watching a bricklayer carefully shape sun-baked mud into the foundation of something big. The blueprint is simple, but bold. A central mosque, flanked by study halls, connected to a wide plaza where traders, students, and travelers will gather. And where does this new vision begin? Timbuktu. At the time, it was just one of many trading posts, respected, sure, but modest. Musa sees something more. It sits at the crossroads of gold, salt, and knowledge, and that makes it priceless. He dispatches resources, orders timber, sends scrolls, invites imams and legal scholars to settle there. One of the first buildings planned? A mosque, likely with input from al-Sahili, but more than that, a library, a center of learning, a place where ideas could be traded like spices and preserved like treasure. Here's a scholarly debate for your pillow. Some argue that Musa exaggerated his building achievements to impress foreign chroniclers. Others say the real construction began after his death, but there's enough physical and written evidence to confirm that under Musa, something significant started. You don't have to know the dimensions of every brick. You just have to feel the shift. The empire was no longer content to be rich. It wanted to be remembered. The road to Timbuktu isn't paved, it isn't straight, and it certainly isn't gentle on the bones. But as you bounce along in a cart beside a cluster of scholars and dusty architects, there's a buzz in the air. The kind of buzz that comes when ideas start stacking like bricks. Quiet, deliberate, and dangerously permanent. Timbuktu, when you arrive, doesn't look like much, yet. It's a dusty cluster of mud brick buildings tucked near the Niger River, surrounded by flat plains and wind-worn paths. A few traders are arguing gently over the price of kola nuts. A camel chews loudly on a dry tuft of grass, and at the center, there's a plot of land that's just been cleared. This, Musa has decided, will be the site of something extraordinary. You walk it slowly, tracing the edges with your feet. In time, it will become Sankore, not just a mosque, not just a school, a center of learning that will someday rival the great universities of Fez, Cairo, and even faraway Cordoba. But right now, it's just dust, promise, potential. Musa begins sending scrolls, hundreds of them, copied by hand, wrapped in leather, carried by trusted couriers. Some are in Arabic, others translated into local dialects. They cover astronomy, mathematics, poetry, medicine, and theology. Some are practical, others purely philosophical. He recruits teachers, not just religious leaders, but thinkers, people who can lecture on irrigation and ethics in the same breath. And yes, he spends. The quirky fact here: in Timbuktu's golden age, owning a single manuscript could be worth more than owning a herd of cattle. Some families would pass books down like heirlooms. Others locked them away in secret compartments. And all of this starts now, with Musa laying the first mental bricks. You sit beneath a shaded awning while a group of students listens to a teacher reading from a thin scroll. The students are barefoot, seated on woven mats, each holding a wooden board for copying verses with charcoal ink. There's no bell to signal the start of class, just rhythm, discipline, curiosity, and the rhythm spreads. Musa doesn't limit himself to Timbuktu. In Jenne, he commissions another mosque, this one built with towering mud spires and intricately carved wooden beams. Its silhouette will one day become one of the most iconic images of medieval Africa, even though few in the modern world can name who funded it. Spoiler alert, it was him. Historians still discuss the exact role of al-Sahili in all this. Some say he directly designed the mosques. Others claim his influence was more advisory, inspiring local builders to adopt and adapt Andalusian styles. But the collaboration itself was the miracle, a fusion of African tradition and Islamic innovation. The result? Architecture that breathes with heat, withstands rain, and glows softly at sunset. Back in Timbuktu, the work continues, not with cranes or scaffolds, but with patience. Workers shape mud bricks by hand, leaving them to dry in the sun. Children are sent to fetch water. Women grind millet nearby, singing softly as they work. The buildings rise slowly, like stories being told, one layer at a time. And Musa? He visits often, never loudly. Sometimes alone, sometimes with advisors. He asks about the thickness of the walls, the airflow of the courtyards, the acoustics of the prayer hall. But always, he asks about the students. Are they learning? Are they copying accurately? Are they asking questions? Because to him, it isn't the gold walls that will last. It's the questions. You pass by a teacher under a tree explaining how the stars can guide a merchant through the desert. Another is discussing inheritance law in quiet tones. A third draws a diagram of the human body in sand, then gently brushes it away. This is Musa's true empire, not built in battle, but in books, and not everyone approves. There are murmurs that he's spending too much on scholars and scribes, that the roads need repair, that the border guards are getting restless. But Musa listens, and then does what he's always done. He invests in permanence, because what good is wealth if it leaves with you? That's the open question he never says out loud, but everyone around him can feel it, in every manuscript copied, in every wall smoothed, in every lesson whispered to a child who will one day teach someone else. And as you sit at dusk, with the city of Timbuktu glowing in the last amber light, you realize you're not just watching history, you're watching it grow. The sun in Timbuktu doesn't rise, it seeps. First as a faint suggestion behind the clay rooftops, then as a slow golden push through dusty air. And beneath its warmth, the city breathes differently now. No longer just a stop for salt caravans or a riverside bazaar. Timbuktu is transforming into something rarer, a home for minds. Mansa Musa doesn't need to rule from here. He still resides primarily in Niani, but his presence lingers. He sends messengers. He funds new construction. And more importantly, he pays the scholars well. Because education, in Musa's Mali, is not charity. It's infrastructure. At the heart of it all is Sankore. The mosque has grown beyond a place of worship. Its halls echo with the scratch of reed pens, the hum of memorized verses, and the faint clink of ink pots. Students sit in loose semicircles, not grouped by age, but by comprehension. A 10-year-old might debate theology beside a merchant's son in his 40s. The system isn't rigid, it's relational. And the curriculum? Surprisingly wide. One day, it's astronomy. The next, grammar. Then jurisprudence, medicine, logic. Even geometry gets its time under the awnings. Teachers draw diagrams in sand, then challenge their students to correct them, not to shame, but to refine. You sit at the edge of a session, where an elderly scholar is discussing Aristotle, filtered through Arabic translations, flavored with local proverbs. He pauses often, not for applause, but for questioning, and the students oblige. This isn't rote learning. This is dialogue. Here's your quirky detail. Some lessons were so informal, they happened while walking. A teacher might begin a discussion at the mosque, continue it through the market, and conclude at the riverbank. Students followed, barefoot and curious, scribbling notes on wooden tablets. And all of this, the buildings, the books, the questions, runs on a system of deliberate support. Musa ensures that scholars receive stipends, that scribes are housed, that couriers have what they need to carry manuscripts to and from other Islamic centers like Fez and Cairo. It's not just about amassing knowledge, it's about circulating it. You hear whispers about a merchant from Cairo who visited Timbuktu recently and declared its libraries more impressive than those back home. Whether he meant it or not is irrelevant. The reputation stuck. And with reputation comes students from Senegal, from Niger, from the Gold Coast. They arrive with small bags, big dreams, and an eagerness to sit on the same floor as the legendary thinkers of the Sahel. Many live frugally, trading chores for lessons, sometimes sleeping in shared courtyards, but none of them leave unchanged. Historians still debate how many manuscripts once filled the libraries of Timbuktu. Some claim hundreds of thousands. Others insist the number has been romanticized. But what no one disputes is this. Musa's investment created a literacy hub in West Africa that stunned the medieval world. You find a scribe in the corner of a shaded room, carefully copying a medical text about herbal remedies for eye infections. His hand is steady. His margin notes are thoughtful. He isn't rushing, because the copy might be sent far, perhaps to a mosque in Morocco or a teacher in Takeda. And maybe, just maybe, it'll save someone's sight. This isn't an empire of statues, it's an empire of ink. And here's the part that often goes unnoticed. Musa doesn't brand any of it. There are no grand inscriptions saying, "Built by Mansa Musa." No coins with his face, no public art projects glorifying his image. His fingerprints are everywhere, but invisible, because for him, legacy isn't carved, it's cultivated, and yet the effects are visible. Timbuktu starts to draw not just students, but thinkers, not just readers, but writers. Philosophers begin composing treatises that challenge earlier ideas. Debates break out, sometimes intense, but always respectful. New interpretations of Islamic law, new methods of arithmetic, even new poetic forms. You pass a courtyard where a group of students is performing a verse challenge. One person recites a couplet, and the next must answer with a rhymed rebuttal. Laughter erupts when someone fumbles, but no one mocks. The rhythm resumes. Learning here is joyful. And yet, Musa isn't finished. He begins to commission scholars to organize the empire's legal systems more rigorously. Sharia courts are formalized, judges are trained, disputes are recorded. For the first time, Mali's governance begins to align more closely with Islamic legal principles, without erasing local customs. It's not a purge, it's a fusion. Some elders grumble, change always grates. But most adapt, because Musa isn't imposing with force, he's offering with reason, and most find it difficult to argue with stability, structure, and scholarship. So now, when you walk through Mali, you don't just hear talk of salt or gold. You hear arguments about grammar. You hear poetry contests in market squares. You hear children reciting passages from memory, and you realize the empire isn't just trading goods anymore. It's exporting thought. It's late afternoon in Niani, and the breeze carries a different scent today. Not dust or firewood, but ink. Fresh, dark and oddly floral. You pass a long table where scribes are gently laying pages out to dry, their brushstrokes still glistening in the sun. They're copying royal tax ledgers, land decrees, records of water rights, evidence that even empires built on gold must still run on paper. Mansa Musa, now back in the full rhythm of governance, hasn't slowed down. The pilgrimage was a turning point, yes, but now comes the machinery, dull, steady, and relentless, the work of making change stick. You join him in a room filled with maps, not the elaborate sea-drenched European kind, but more like trade schematics, routes scratched on cured leather, towns marked with dots the size of millet seeds. Musa studies them with quiet attention, not for conquest, for connection, because even with his growing reputation, trade remains the empire's true heartbeat. Gold still flows from the mines of Bambouk and Bouré, as it has for generations. The empire's control of those resources is as vital as ever, but so is managing how that gold moves. Who handles it? Who measures it? Who decides how much is taxed? You observe as a tall man enters the room carrying a cloth bag sealed with wax. He kneels, opens it slowly, and spills a cascade of fine gold dust onto a weighed stone. A scribe leans forward, brush in hand, and begins noting measurements. No one speaks. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Mansa Musa reorganized Mali's taxation system, standardizing weights and measures to better manage trade. He appointed royal inspectors to ensure fairness at market points, particularly where foreign traders crossed into Malian territory. It wasn't flashy policy, but it worked. And here's your quirky side note. In some districts, taxes could be paid in cloth, salt, or even fish paste, depending on the season. What mattered wasn't the form, it was the value. Musa's administration adapted, fluid, and local, but beneath the surface of efficiency, something subtler was at play. Trust. Mali's economy didn't run on royal edicts alone. It ran on relationships. Market leaders were often chosen not for their wealth, but for their honesty. Musa understood this, so he supported local councils, encouraged merchants to settle disputes through respected elders, and ensured that no tax collector grew too powerful too fast. You watch one of those collectors arrive at court. He's nervous. His sandals are worn, his scrolls tied in fraying twine. Musa listens as the man speaks of a border village hit by drought. Tax receipts were low. Families couldn't pay. Musa doesn't scold. He simply nods and asks if a shipment of grain has been dispatched yet. When told no, he orders it. On the spot. He governs the way he prays, with consistency, with calm, and occasionally with silence that lands harder than any command. Meanwhile, the gold keeps flowing, and not just dust, ingots too, jewelry, gilded thread, a quiet shimmer across markets from Gao to Janneh. But it's carefully controlled. Musa never lets the gold rush consume Mali the way it once did Cairo. He remembers the inflation, the chaos, the unintended consequences of generosity. So this time, he builds guardrails. Foreign merchants are allowed, but taxed. Gold exports are limited, and royal storage remains exactly that, royal. Musa's treasuries, tucked into fortified clay buildings deep in the capital, remain sealed, guarded, and remarkably discreet. There are no golden palaces, no fountains shaped like lions. Musa has always understood that wealth, if paraded, turns to poison. Instead, he funds roads, not stone highways, but cleared, reinforced trade paths connecting city to city, outpost to river port. He assigns maintenance crews, issues weather alerts, even installs distance markers in some regions, carved into rock, simple and effective. You travel one of those roads, watching a column of donkeys hauling copper from the east. their drivers singing a slow, steady song that makes the dust seem less intrusive. This is the world Musa wanted. Not an empire of war drums, but of weight scales and water jars, of grain stores and bookshelves. Historians still debate whether he anticipated just how long-lasting his systems would be, whether he knew that the administrative structures he reinforced would survive not just his reign, but his sons and his grandsons and beyond, or whether he simply ruled with the kind of wisdom that leaves strong footprints without needing to check if anyone's following. But there's no debate about this. For a time, Mali worked. It wasn't perfect. No empire is. But gold moved. Books multiplied. Ideas spread. And for a brief window in the medieval world, a West African kingdom led not with swords or ships, but with structure. And it all comes back to this one man, rising early, listening quietly, and choosing, deliberately, not to build monuments to himself. He built systems instead. You step into a room with no windows and low ceilings, lit only by 2 narrow oil lamps mounted in alcoves. It's cooler here, and quiet in a way that feels intentional, not the absence of sound, but the design of silence. At the far end of the room, a scroll lies open on a desk. The handwriting is careful, elegant. The script alternates between Arabic and a local language, flowing in parallel lines like 2 rivers meeting. This is a record of return, not Musa's, but his empire's. Mali, after the pilgrimage, after the reforms, after the quiet explosion of schools and markets, is entering a phase that few empires manage: consolidation. This is the part where things either sink or settle. But instead of retreating into wealth or letting the bureaucracy calcify, Musa chooses something else. He begins traveling internally. He moves between regions, not to inspect with suspicion, but to encourage. In towns where scholars have settled, he sends supplies. In cities where markets are growing, he ensures fair scales. In border provinces, he checks for smoldering disputes between local leaders and settles them with the same calm he used in Cairo's courtrooms. You ride alongside him as he approaches a riverside town recently struck by flooding. The mosque there is cracked, its walls softened by water. Musa doesn't order a rebuild. He kneels beside the local imam and asks what the community needs most. They speak for 20 minutes. Then, quietly, he commissions a new well, a granary, and a stipend for 2 teachers to stay. He leads without spectacle, and the people respond, not with fanfare, but with stability. Trade grows steadier, school attendance rises, even tax collection becomes more predictable. Not painless, but trusted. And here's your quirky image. To keep records safe, some of Mali's scribes develop a practice of storing scrolls inside large clay jars sealed with beeswax. The jars are buried in shaded storage pits beneath buildings, cool, dry, and remarkably effective. Some of these jars would survive centuries. It's not glamorous, but it's genius. You walk through one of these underground vaults now. The air is thick and still. The rows of sealed jars stretch back into the gloom, each labeled in faint charcoal marks. Topics ranging from rainfall logs to inheritance disputes. You realize you're standing in one of the oldest functional archives in sub-Saharan Africa. And it only exists because someone decided the little things mattered. That someone, of course, is still on the move. In one town, Musa arranges for women to receive education alongside boys, a rare initiative in many parts of the medieval world. In another, he convenes a local council to draft guidelines for handling disputes over grazing land, knowing full well that future famines will test community bonds. He's not playing king. He's laying foundations. Historians still argue whether Musa fully understood the longevity of his decisions. Some say he was just following Islamic governance models with regional flair. Others insist he was consciously crafting a legacy to last beyond his name. Maybe both are true, maybe neither. But here's what's undeniable. His leadership begins to shape behavior. You hear a trader refuse a bribe because Musa once visited his town and spoke about justice. You see a young girl writing with a stick in the dirt because her brother taught her what his teacher taught him. You pass a shopkeeper who's built a small side room for quiet study because two travelers once paid him in books instead of coins. And slowly you understand. This isn't just a rich kingdom anymore. It's a culture of continuity. Even foreign visitors begin to notice. Word spreads among merchants that Mali isn't just safe, it's functional. That contracts are honored, that courts listen, that education, while still expensive, is respected more than fashion. Musa's empire isn't growing out, it's growing in. You return to Timbuktu one evening to find the mosque's outer walls covered in soft candlelight. A group of students is reciting verses on astronomy, their voices rising in a kind of chant. One begins to sketch a star chart into the sand, connecting dots with a steady finger. Behind them, a teacher smiles. And somewhere, perhaps in Niani, perhaps just outside the city on a walk, Musa is sitting beneath a tree, listening, always listening. Because that's the secret, really. He doesn't rule by command. He rules by presence. You arrive in Timbuktu again just as the rains have ended. The streets are firm but damp, the air tinged with petrichor and charcoal, and the city is humming. Not loudly, but in the way a library hums when every seat is full. Students shuffle between courtyards, market stalls rattle open, and in the distance, the Sankore Mosque rises like an anchor in the soft light. You slip into one of its side entrances, ducking beneath an arch low enough to force even the shortest scribe to nod respectfully. Inside, the hush is deeper, the air cooler, and the walls, mud brick reinforced with organic fiber, seem to breathe quietly along with the people inside. This isn't a place of performance, it's a place of preparation. Here, Mansa Musa's vision is at its most refined, not in gold, not in grain, but in parchment. You follow a thin corridor and emerge into a study hall where 2 rows of students kneel on mats, facing a teacher who's drawing circles with chalk on a slate board. He speaks softly, but clearly. The lesson today is on the phases of the moon and how they relate to both prayer schedules and agricultural planting. It's astronomy, theology, and weather science rolled into one. And it's not an anomaly. This kind of interdisciplinary learning is the norm here. Subjects don't compete, they complement. The curriculum at Sankore expands steadily. Logic, grammar, law, medicine, rhetoric, geometry, even music theory and mineralogy if the teacher has traveled far enough. And as new texts arrive, from Egypt, from Andalusia, from the wider Muslim world, they're copied, discussed, and folded into the learning. One manuscript you pass is a translation of Galen's writings on anatomy. Another is a treatise on the ethical duties of leadership. A third, written in flowing Arabic script with occasional local annotations, is a legal argument about water rights during droughts. Here's your mainstream fact. By the late 14th century, Timbuktu had become one of the most important centers of Islamic scholarship in the world. Its universities drew students from across North and West Africa, and its scholars were widely respected in legal and theological circles. And here's your quirky gem. Many of the texts copied here weren't just academic. They were practical. Recipes for ink that wouldn't fade in heat, instructions for treating camel sores, charts for calculating fair market grain prices based on rainfall totals. This was no ivory tower. It was a tool kit for empire. You sit under a woven canopy near the outer courtyard watching a young student carefully mend the corner of a manuscript page. His hands are stained with ink. His brow furrows in concentration. A cat, silent and thin, pads across the stones behind him. No one minds. Even the animals move softly here. The teachers, often called muallims, aren't distant figures on pedestals. They're mentors, often former students themselves. Some wear plain white robes. Others favor indigo-dyed cloth that marks them as Songhai or Tuareg. And their teaching style? Less lecture, more dialogue. A student stands to read a verse. Another challenges the interpretation. The teacher listens, then gently offers a third perspective, referencing a passage from memory. A nod follows. No winner, no loser, just movement. And you can feel it. Musa's presence, not in voice, but in purpose. He rarely visited Sankore in person once it was established. His court responsibilities kept him elsewhere. But his influence was constant. Funding, messaging, a steady drip of support that never demanded attention, but ensured momentum. He understood that institutions thrive when they aren't centered on one man. You glance across the courtyard and see a storage room with a heavy wooden door. Inside are racks of scrolls, each meticulously tagged, dated, and indexed in a register. The librarian, a tall woman with bright eyes and cracked palms, walks you through the catalog. She speaks 6 languages and knows precisely where the oldest scroll on meteorology is stored. Historians still debate how many scrolls were housed in Timbuktu's peak years. Some say 300,000. Others call that generous. But here's what matters. For centuries, knowledge lived here on purpose. You pass by a group of travelers resting outside the mosque walls. One of them, a scholar from Kano, has just finished a 6-month journey by caravan. He's come for the commentaries on Maliki jurisprudence, but he also plans to stay for a year to study rhetoric and logic. His eyes light up as he describes the teaching style at Sankore. They don't rush here, he says. They let the text open slowly. It's the kind of place where time bends a little, where pages turn at the pace of thought, where silence isn't a pause, it's a tool. And in that silence, Musa's vision grows, not because people chant his name, but because they copy his intent. One slow letter at a time. Night falls softly over Timbuktu. There are no streetlights, no glowing signs, just the warm flicker of oil lamps behind lattice windows and the occasional low murmur of evening prayer. But in one corner of the city, just off the edge of the Sankore Mosque, there's a room still lit. A low hum carries from inside, not voices, not song, just the gentle brush of pen against parchment. You step into Sankore's inner sanctum, the study quarters. This is where the most advanced students reside. It's not a dormitory. It's a space of endurance. These are the ones who study all night, quietly, reverently, sometimes without moving for hours. They're not here to pass exams. They're here to master thought. You find a small alcove lined with wooden boards, each coated in fine white chalk and wrapped in cloth. The students use them like reusable notebooks, copying passages from memory, erasing gently with water, then starting again. There's no rush. It's about precision, repetition, retention. One student is reciting a passage aloud in rhythmic cadence. It's a section of the Muwatta, a foundational text in Maliki Islamic law. As he speaks, another student nods in tempo, confirming accuracy from memory alone. When he falters, there's no rebuke, just a shared pause, a soft correction, and then they begin again. This is the night school of Sankore, and it's not just memorization, it's debate. You move through another room where 2 students, barefoot, kneeling, are engaged in a quiet back and forth about a legal clause concerning inheritance. They alternate speaking, not to win, but to refine. A teacher nearby listens with his eyes closed, interrupting only once to offer a more precise interpretation. This, too, is part of Mansa Musa's design. You won't find his name etched into these walls, but his influence is in the oil that keeps the lamps burning, in the ink imported from Egypt, in the fine parchment traded by camel caravan from Andalusia, in the stipends that allow these students to study full-time without starving. Here's your mainstream detail. Sankore University operated on a decentralized system of instruction. There were no formal classes or grades, but a master-apprentice dynamic. Students progressed when their teacher deemed them ready, sometimes after years, sometimes after decades. And here's your fringe delight. Some students became so skilled at a particular style of calligraphy that their scrolls were traded like artwork, not for the words themselves, but for the hand that shaped them. Entire libraries were organized not just by subject, but by scribe. You run your fingers over the edge of a shelf labeled Ali bin Mahmud, a known scribe whose handwriting was so compact and elegant that a single scroll could contain an entire treatise. His descendants still copy in the same style. And above all this, the stars. You step outside into the courtyard and tilt your head. There's no roof here, just the night, clear, vast, pulsing. And against that black canvas, the scholars of Timbuktu trained themselves to read the sky. Astronomy was more than theory. It was utility, calendars for planting, timing of prayers, navigation for caravans. Musa funded this too. Scrolls with star charts, instruments for celestial observation. He even invited scholars to debate planetary motion, not to find consensus, but to keep curiosity alive. You watch as a teacher uses a polished bronze plate to demonstrate the lunar cycle. He traces shadows across the plate's surface, explaining how to read the crescent and full moon. The students don't take notes. They watch. Then they repeat it back in gesture, in verse, in diagram scratched into the earth. It's late now. Someone begins boiling tea in the corner. The smell is sweet, mint, sugar, maybe a touch of clove. A student nods off mid-recitation, their chin drooping, still holding a stylus. No one wakes them. The study continues without them. This is what Musa understood. Power fades. But questions echo. He didn't just build walls. He built walls where students would argue inside. He didn't just bring books. He made sure someone knew how to copy them. And he didn't just study the stars. He made sure someone else would know where to look. You sit for a while in the corner of the courtyard, wrapped in a wool shawl someone lent you. There's no noise, just movement. A pen scratches, a kettle hisses, a sentence is whispered and corrected, and somewhere behind it all, the gold of Mali rests in silence. Because tonight, it's ink, not treasure, that glows. Morning in Jenne begins not with bells, but with birds. They flit from the rooftops of mud brick houses, their wings tracing lazy arcs through air already thick with humidity. The Niger shimmers nearby, slow and brown, and the city stretches out with quiet confidence, wide courtyards, low buildings, and one rising shape that dominates them all, the Grand Mosque. You stand at its base now, craning your neck to take in the full sweep of its earthen facade. It looks like it grew straight out of the ground, like a tree that decided it wanted to be a cathedral instead. Ribbed with wooden beams that stick out like bones beneath skin, the mosque seems alive, not because it moves, but because it changes. And this too was shaped by Mansa Musa. Well, mostly. Historians still debate whether the current mosque was built under his direction or rebuilt decades later, but what they agree on is this: Musa transformed Mali's architecture, not with marble or gold leaf, but with vision and mud. Yes, mud. You duck inside and feel the air drop 10 degrees. The walls are thick, sometimes more than 2 feet, and they breathe. Sunlight slips through tiny, high windows, striping the floor with light like threads on a loom. And the silence inside? Not heavy, just calm. You sit on the floor alongside a few others. No one speaks. A man nearby counts beads on a string. Another reads slowly from a scroll. This isn't a classroom. This is a structure designed to slow the body and sharpen the mind. Musa, after returning from Mecca, brought more than books and scholars. He brought the desire to build, but not imitation, adaptation. Instead of replicating Cairo's minarets or Mecca's courtyards, Mali's builders, many of them trained or influenced by Andalusian advisors like Al-Sahili, crafted a hybrid: local materials, local labor, global ideas. The result? Earth that teaches. Outside, you watch as children carry baskets of clay to a construction site. The mud has been mixed with rice husks for strength, left to cure in the sun, and shaped into bricks. No cranes, no scaffolding. Just scaffolding made from wood beams pushed directly into the walls. Practical and beautiful. And here's your quirky truth. Every year after the rainy season, Jenny's residents gather for a festival where the entire community replasters the mosque. Children and elders alike climb the wooden beams, smoothing fresh mud over cracks with bare hands. It's part maintenance, part celebration. And no matter what decade it is, the structure survives because the people remember. Musa's architectural legacy didn't lie in luxury, it lay in longevity. You walk through a nearby alley where homes are built in the same style: cool, curved, inward-facing. The architecture of Mali follows the climate: thick walls to trap cool air, flat roofs for drying grain, shaded courtyards for conversation. But beneath that practicality is thought, order, design, a deliberate sense of beauty. And it wasn't just religious. Musa funded granaries that used domed ceilings to reduce spoilage. He encouraged traders to build rest houses with inner courtyards for weary travelers. Even public fountains, simple spouts feeding from underground channels, were placed in markets shaded by acacia trees. Not extravagant, just thoughtful. You pass by one of those fountains now. A donkey stands nearby, blinking slowly in the heat. A woman with a copper jug waits her turn, humming something quiet. The water isn't cold, but it's clean, and someone, somewhere, had to decide it should be there. You walk further into the city and find a rectangular plaza under renovation. The builders are working in near silence, their tools simple: wooden mallets, stone chisels, spades carved from tree branches. And yet the geometry of the space is precise: right angles, clean lines, carefully laid foundation. You see no rulers, no blueprints, just memory. This is how architecture survives in Mali, not just in form, but in practice. Skills passed down, walls maintained, not a monument to be admired, but a structure to be lived in. Historians still argue whether Musa himself laid out these plans or simply empowered those who did. Some say his architects were foreign. Others insist local genius did the heavy lifting. Either way, his leadership made space for it, literally. And so, as you step into another mud brick hallway cooled by the morning shade, you realize these buildings are more than protection. They're instruction. Lessons in airflow, humility, adaptation, balance. The mosque does not rise alone. It rises because the city does. And Mansa Musa, even years after his return, is still rising with it. One wall, one scroll, one breath of earth at a time. The road bends as you head back into the countryside, away from Djenné's proud spires and into the layered rhythms of everyday empire. Gone are the scholars in indigo robes, the scroll sellers, and the sun-warmed libraries. Here, the fields stretch long and low, interrupted by granaries shaped like upright drums and clusters of round mud huts with thatched roofs. Chickens dart underfoot, children chase goats, and Mali breathes in its simplest form. But don't mistake simplicity for silence. This is where the real work of empire unfolds, not in gold or manuscripts, but in management. You pause near a wooden bench outside a grain storage post. A clerk sits there, not grandly dressed, not guarded, but with a scroll and a weighted scale. Farmers line up with baskets of millet, each awaiting their turn. The clerk marks something with a charcoal pen, then nods for the next. This is Musa's governance, quiet, methodical, maddeningly consistent. He may have funded mosques and schools, but he also funded systems. The unseen gears that kept the gold flowing, the granaries full, and the disputes small. And here's how it worked. Each region of Mali had its own appointed official, a governor, a tax collector, a local judge. Some were noblemen, others were chosen for their honesty. The goal wasn't control, it was coherence. You follow one of these officials as he walks the edge of the riverbank, inspecting the irrigation channels dug months earlier. They divert just enough water to keep the fields rich without risking floods. And if there's a problem, too much sand, not enough flow, he scribbles a note, ties it with a reed string, and sends it by rider to the central court. Here's your mainstream fact. Under Mansa Musa, Mali had one of the most structured tax and resource allocation systems in the medieval Islamic world. Revenues were gathered not just in coin or dust, but in grain, cloth, livestock, and salt, each taxed according to local conditions. And your quirky detail? In some villages, tax was partially paid in fish cakes, salted, pressed, and stacked into bricks that were easier to transport than live fish and lasted months without spoiling. It wasn't elegant, it was effective. You pass a roadside tribunal where a village elder hears two farmers argue over boundary lines. There's no yelling, just tension. One claims the millet row was shifted, the other says the markers were always there. A third man, not a party in the dispute, offers to walk the border with both and pray over the verdict. No royal decree is issued, but the process itself, that's royal in spirit. Because Musa didn't just write rules, he taught people how to apply them. When problems rose that couldn't be settled locally, like trade disputes or land inheritance, people would travel to Niani or later to Timbuktu, seeking higher judgment. They weren't turned away. They weren't taxed for asking. And most importantly, they trusted the answer. You visit a records room back in the capital. There are no shelves, just rows of clay jars, each sealed with wax and labeled with streaks of ink. Inside, dispute rulings, contracts, copies of trade weights, inventories of grain sent during famines. Some are decades old, but still referenced. Continuity wasn't optional, it was survival, and all of it relied on people. So Musa invested in them too. He ordered the training of more clerks, funded scribes to travel with judges, sent surveyors with braided cords to measure plots of land, encouraged inter-region dialogue, not to erase differences, but to resolve them. One judge you meet keeps a small curved horn hanging from his belt. When asked why, he smiles and says, "It's for when people forget to speak kindly." He's only used it twice in 20 years. and it's working. Markets expand, not just in the cities, but in small towns along the trade routes. A merchant from Gao travels without bodyguards because he knows the road is monitored. A copper seller from Tagaza brings her goods to market by donkey alone. Her confidence says more than any treaty. Historians still question how much of this structure was Musa's invention and how much was inherited, but even they admit this. He made it functional. He took the bones of an empire and gave them muscle. And that muscle? It was administrative. You sit now under a tamarind tree watching villagers build a fence, not for war, not for display, but to mark grazing land for the dry season. A boy carries twine. A woman instructs where the posts go. No one argues. Because long ago, a king crossed a continent, returned with wisdom, and quietly set rules in motion. Rules that didn't glitter, but held. You wake to the sound of drums. Not war drums, not festival drums, but something steadier. A low, deliberate rhythm that rolls across the hills of Niani like thunder with manners. You follow the sound toward the palace compound and find a gathering already underway. Courtiers seated cross-legged, advisors leaning on canes, messengers waiting in doorways. This isn't a celebration, it's a review. Mansa Musa is seated at the center. No throne, no jewels, just a finely woven mat and a wooden writing board across his knees. He's reading a letter, or rather, having it read to him, by a young scribe with a voice that carries. The letter is from a northern trader seeking permission to build a new outpost closer to one of Mali's gold sources. The trader offers incentives, pledges loyalty, and signs off with a flourish of exaggerated honorifics. Musa nods once, then asks a question no one expected. What is his intent for the workers? Silence. It's one of those moments where power doesn't shout, but everyone hears it. You watch as the letter is read again, this time more slowly. Musa picks apart each phrase, not to embarrass, but to clarify. What protections are offered? Will families be relocated? Who sets the wages? Here is a ruler who could have simply said yes, who could have granted the request and moved on. But he doesn't, because wealth in Mali is no longer measured only in mines. It's measured in motives. You sit outside after the meeting with a few junior clerks, one of whom is sketching out revisions to the local charter for that gold region. He sighs and says, he won't stop asking questions. But his tone, it's admiration, not frustration. Musa is older now. His beard is thicker with gray, his movements slower, but his mind, still sharper than a spear tip. He asks more questions than ever, not about expansion, but about legacy. He visits schools, courts, granaries. He sends letters to elders in small villages, asking if their wells are still functioning. He even insists on reviewing how religious leaders are chosen in distant towns, wary of corruption. Historians still debate whether this phase of Musa's reign was driven by fear of decline or clarity of vision. Some say he sensed that empires rot from the inside. Others argue he simply wanted to be a good man, maybe both. But here's your quirky insight. Musa occasionally disguised himself when visiting outer provinces. It's a fringe story, mostly oral, but it's said he once traveled to a border village as a simple trader just to hear how locals spoke of their king. When he returned, he adjusted the tax rate on imported wool. Was the story true? Who knows? But in an empire ruled by quiet influence, a rumor like that is as good as policy. You ride with him one evening through the countryside. No guards, just 2 advisors and a quiet horse. He stops at a small school built beside a mango grove and watches as the students recite. One child stumbles. Musa walks over, kneels, and corrects her gently. No one breathes. Then she smiles, and the class continues. You return to Niani under the cover of dusk. The air smells of wet clay and roasting onions. Somewhere, a prayer call echoes low. Musa is already back at work, reviewing trade numbers from the copper routes near Takeda. He isn't chasing more. He's tightening what already exists. Under his guidance, even internal communication becomes more efficient. Scrolls arrive faster. Riders know which paths flood during the rainy season. One bureaucrat develops a system of color-coded wax seals, red for tax, green for legal, blue for religious correspondence. It catches on. Molly hums, not perfectly, not always smoothly, but consistently. And that, in a world of empires born and broken by ego, is a miracle in itself. You sit now in a dim chamber where a copy of Musa's land charter is being prepared. It outlines ownership, water rights, responsibilities during famine. The scribe uses ink mixed with powdered charcoal and plant gum, dark, lasting, slightly fragrant. He pauses, reads back a clause, and adjusts a line. Not to flatter, to clarify. Because clarity is how things endure. And Mansa Musa, though never boastful, is now more aware than ever of time's weight. His hair is silver, his circle of advisors smaller, but his questions more piercing. What happens after him? Who will hold the structure when his voice is no longer present? He doesn't answer. He just keeps building. You find yourself in a shaded corridor behind the palace in Niani, where the air smells of rain-damp straw and old ink. A guard steps aside, and you enter a narrow room with no windows, only a high slit near the ceiling that lets in a single band of dusty light. At a small table, 3 men whisper over a piece of parchment so thin it moves with their breath. The scribe's hands are steady, but his voice is quiet, unsure, because the question they're debating has no clear answer. When did Mansa Musa die? The room isn't ceremonial, it's functional. There's no golden sarcophagus, no carved inscription, just scrolls, records, contradictions. In one account, Musa dies in 1332. In another, 1337. Some scholars think he passed away earlier, and that his son ruled quietly under his name to maintain stability. Others argue Musa lived longer than anyone expected, slipping into the background while the systems he built ran without need of direct command. Historians still argue, sometimes politely, sometimes fiercely, because Musa, ever consistent, left few clear personal markers. His governance was collective, his decisions rarely signed with flourish, his image never immortalized in grand sculptures or paintings. You pass a small, sealed jar tucked into the corner of the archive. It's labeled with a single name, Maga, Musa's son. What we know of him is limited. He succeeded his father, yes, but did he inherit the wisdom, the discipline, the patience? Records suggest that under Maga, some of the system held. Trade routes stayed active. Scholars continued to arrive. But cracks formed too, disputes over succession, rising tensions in outer provinces, whispers of favoritism. You ride to a market town to the north where the name Mansa Musa still carries weight. A trader sells spices wrapped in scroll fragments, discarded, reused, misunderstood. When you ask about the king, the trader shrugs. He made the road safe, she says. He made it so I could travel here alone. That's all she says. Then she goes back to wrapping peppercorns. And maybe that's the point. Musa didn't build a cult of personality. He built a memory of security. Still, the empire is changing. Slowly, subtly. Some governors begin enriching themselves a little more than before. Gold shipments from the mines begin arriving late. A border tax collector begins asking for gifts before granting safe passage. You follow a scholar walking back from Sankore with a scroll under his arm and weariness in his step. He says fewer students come these days, not because they aren't eager, but because their families can no longer afford to send them. In the palace, you pass a chamber once filled with maps and quiet arguments. Now it's filled with raised voices. Musa's successors hold meetings, public, loud, filled with advisors who wear gold on their sleeves and speak in half-truths. The tone has changed. Musa's shadow is long, but it's not endless. You walk the hall at night, past a window where wind stirs the curtains. Somewhere out there, across the fields, the gold still sleeps under earth. The scholars still read by lamp, the wells still draw water, but the hands holding it all together? Different, not worse, not corrupt, not yet, but lesser. The difference is one of restraint, of a voice that once said no when it was easier to say yes. That asked for 10 questions before signing one decree. That prioritized grain ledgers over banquet invitations. And that voice, it seems, is gone. Still, remnants remain. You find a school teacher in a quiet village who still teaches astronomy with the star maps Musa commissioned. A judge in a dry province who still cites royal land, decrees that bear Musa's mark. A caravan leader who insists on paying exact tolls, no more, no less, because that's what the old king expected. You sit beneath a tamarind tree beside the river, where Musa once bathed before prayer. The water moves slowly, carrying silt, carrying memory. And you wonder, maybe it doesn't matter exactly when he died. Maybe what matters is what kept living after. The map you unroll now isn't from Mali. It's European, drawn in parchment and colored with mineral dusts that have faded into soft pastels. Along the lower edge, between stylized drawings of camels and fantastical sea beasts, a figure sits on a throne. His skin is dark, his crown is gold, and in his right hand, he holds a nugget the size of an orange. In elegant Latin script, the cartographer labels him Rex Mela, Mansa Musa, richest king of all the world. You lean back and realize this is how Europe first saw him, not through books, not through diplomacy, through rumor, amplified into illustration. A king made of wealth. This map, part of the 1375 Catalan Atlas, may be the first European depiction of a sub-Saharan ruler with any identifiable name and features. It wasn't meant to be exact. It was meant to say, there's gold down there, and someone's in charge of it. Historians still argue how much of this was rooted in fact versus legend. Did European traders actually know Musa's policies? Likely not. But his pilgrimage had shaken the Islamic world enough that the echoes reached Italian harbors and Iberian ports. You're now standing in a port town on the Mediterranean, perhaps in Genoa or Valencia, where spice merchants and map makers gather in taverns filled with tobacco haze and half-translated stories. One merchant swears he met a caravan from Mali. Another says he heard the king had entire rivers of gold. Someone else adds that the royal stables were shod with diamonds. All wrong, of course, but nobody corrects them, because myth travels faster than memory. And Musa, quiet as he was, had become legend. Even among the Islamic scholars who had hosted him, like Al-Umari in Cairo or Ibn Khaldun years later, his name held gravity. His wealth was often exaggerated, but his conduct always praised. Dignified, devout, generous to a fault, a man who neither begged for attention nor refused it when it came. You imagine now a European scholar in the late 1300s receiving a shipment of Arabic texts, carefully carried across sea and sand, containing mentions of Musa's Hajj. He reads with disbelief. A black African king, capable of bankrupting cities through charity? It upends everything he thought he knew. And so, the image of Mansa Musa morphs, shifting from historical figure to symbol. To some, he becomes proof of Africa's hidden splendor. To others, a tantalizing goal. Portuguese explorers in the next century will launch expeditions southward, not for knowledge, but for wealth, hoping to find Musa's mines, his roads, his gold. They won't. Because what Musa left behind wasn't treasure you could dig up. It was systems, culture, discipline. You return now to Mali, to a quiet village school where the teacher, half blind, hunched, still keeps a manuscript in a wooden box. It's a copy of one of the earliest chronicles that mentions Musa's Hajj. The teacher doesn't read from it often. It's too delicate. But today, he opens it. He reads aloud the lines describing Musa's procession into Cairo. The silence he kept, the gold he gave, the prayers he offered. The students listen not like they're hearing a king's biography, but a fable with truth at its core. Here's your quirky twist. Centuries later, American pop culture would rediscover Musa, not through textbooks, but internet lists. Richest man in history, headlines shout. More than Jeff Bezos, maybe even more than Croesus. And yet, the real wealth he left wasn't measured in coins. It was measured in how long his shadow stretched after he left a room. You sit now in a library that may or may not carry his signature, but it carries his intent. Scrolls line the walls, lamps hang low, and a student beside you whispers, "He didn't teach us to be rich. He taught us to think." That's what legend does. It flickers, it changes. But if rooted in real decisions, real systems, and real minds, it survives. And so, somewhere in the margin of a European map, somewhere on a scroll in a desert school, somewhere in the quiet rhythm of gold dust being measured at a market, the memory of Musa lingers, not as a king who ruled, but as a man who left the world structured enough to remember him. The wind picks up across the Sahel, not fast, not loud, just steady. It dances through acacia trees, rustles the tall millet, and slips through half-buried doorways where no one has stepped in years. You're in the outskirts now, beyond the cities, beyond even the towns, where old trade posts once stood and silence has retaken its claim. This was Mali, too. You pass a crumbling watchtower, its top long gone, swallowed by sand and time. Further on, the outline of a caravanserai remains, a square foundation, a few leaning walls, some scattered ceramic fragments that once held water or dates or ink. The empire is still here, just quiet. Because even legacies built on gold can rust if left unattended. After Mansa Musa's death, Mali did not collapse. It drifted. His son, Maga, ruled for a time. Others followed. The systems Musa left behind, his bureaucracy, his roads, his scholar stipends, held for decades. But slowly, almost politely, they thinned. Governors took more liberties. Scholars left for safer cities. Trade routes shifted, pulled toward rising powers like Songhai. And the desert? The desert moved. Here's your mainstream fact. As trade patterns evolved and environmental conditions changed, once thriving cities like Walata and even parts of Timbuktu began to lose prominence. It wasn't a dramatic fall, more like a long, slow exhale. And here's your quiet marvel. Many families in Timbuktu, well into the 20th century, still stored medieval manuscripts wrapped in cloth, tucked into clay pots, hidden under floorboards. They didn't read them aloud. They protected them, because they remembered. You walk into one such home now. The courtyard is cracked, the paint long faded, but inside, a trunk remains, cedar wood lined with wax. A man opens it and lifts out a scroll as gently as if it were glass. The ink has faded to brown. The corners are curled, but the script is legible. It's a legal ruling issued under Mansa Musa's seal, dated to the mid-14th century. He hands it to his granddaughter. She doesn't read it, not yet. She's just learning Arabic, but she holds it with both hands. This is what remains. No armies, no palaces, just fragments of law, of language, of vision, and sand. You walk along the edge of an old caravan route now barely visible. Occasionally, a cluster of stones marks where a rest stop once stood. In the distance, the ghost of a wall, a line of baked mud bricks, slumped and curved, like the spine of something ancient and half-sleeping. People still live nearby. They farm. They pray. They trade. But they don't speak of Musa like a king. They speak of him like weather, something that passed through, changed everything, and left rhythms still felt underfoot. Historians still debate when the real fall of Mali happened. Some say it was the mid-15th century, when Tuareg invasions disrupted trade in Timbuktu. Others point to the rise of the Songhai Empire under Sunni Ali. But no one denies the moment when the weight shifted, when the voice that asked hard questions stopped being heard. Empires don't always fall with fire. Sometimes they fade in the absence of listening. And yet, across centuries, Musa survives. In European maps, in Arabic chronicles, in oral traditions, in cracked scrolls that scholars still painstakingly restore in Timbuktu today. In the idea that leadership can be both devout and pragmatic, quiet and bold, that a man can hold both a Quran and a budget in the same hand and do both well. You stop at a well near the Niger, now half dry. A woman draws water with a rope made of twisted goat hide. You ask her if she's heard of Mansa Musa. She nods. He was the one who walked far and gave what he didn't need. It's not a quote from any book, but it's enough. Because the river may change course, the gold may dull, but generosity and order and thought can echo longer than stone. The wind has calmed. The sun hangs low now, a soft orange disk barely brushing the edge of the horizon. You're seated in the shade of an old fig tree just outside Niani, the city that once beat as the heart of Musa's empire. The leaves above stir with the weightless effort of evening, casting dappled light across the dry ground. You listen. There's no song, no speech, just the steady sound of breath and earth, sharing the same rhythm. This is the end, not of the empire, not of the gold, but of the man. No tomb has ever been confirmed, no statue, no formal epitaph carved in stone, just memories, patterns, effects that outlast the cause. You rise and begin walking slowly, tracing the path back toward the old palace foundation. The walls are mostly gone now, just a few bricks where the audience hall may have stood. The structure has softened with time, as though trying to return to the ground it came from. But still, it stands. Here, you imagine Musa seated on his mat, listening to reports about water shortages. Here, perhaps, he questioned a clerk about inflated prices. Here, he may have written letters to scholars across the Sahara, asking for books, or blessings, or answers. He never ruled by fear. He ruled by shape. He shaped processes, shaped expectations, shaped what it meant to be king in a world that too often confused power with noise. And maybe that's the most lasting thing he left behind. Not a golden legend, but a quiet one. A kingdom whose greatest strength wasn't in the amount of treasure it held, but in the way it used it. A reign remembered not for expansion, but for integration. For trade balanced with trust. For education anchored in accessibility. For questions that didn't just instruct, but outlived him. You sit again now, beneath that fig tree, and watch a boy walking the old road with a goatskin water pouch and a bundle of sugarcane. He pauses, not out of reverence, but out of habit. This path is worn. It has meaning, even if he doesn't say why. And in that moment, you understand what Mansa Musa truly built. Not monuments, but momentum, the kind that carries across time, across silence, across the slow erasure of sand and memory, the kind that still teaches, if you're quiet enough to listen. And so, as the stars begin to prick through the sky one by one, you rest your eyes. There are no more scrolls to open, no more roads to follow. Just the soft certainty that somewhere in the dust of forgotten cities and the breath of old books, the gold of Mali still glows. It glows not in vaults, but in minds. And it whispers still. Let your breath slow now. You're not on a caravan anymore. You're not in a mosque or a library or beneath the burning sky of a desert kingdom. You're in a soft place, one where history doesn't demand anything from you, except stillness. Let the story of Mansa Musa settle into your memory like ink on parchment, deliberate, careful, meant to last. His world was slower than ours, wiser in ways we sometimes forget, built on calligraphy, not code, on rhythm, not rush, on the understanding that wealth means little unless it moves outward, unless it leaves something better behind. Tonight, his roads are quiet, his scrolls are safe, and the empire he built, that fusion of trade, faith, thought, and order, still hums softly in the background of time. So close your eyes, feel the dust underfoot fade into pillows. Let the glow of the lamp become stars above a calm Sahel night. The questions he asked, about justice, about purpose, about what we owe each other, they don't need answers right now. Just rest. Tomorrow the world will still be here. And so will the quiet legacy of a king who never raised his voice. Sleep well.